Well, good morning, everybody. I always feel a bit intimidated coming into a room like this because I have to say that I don't know really an awful lot about vehicles apart from the fact I drive one. And I thought it'd be really helpful for me if you could give me some idea about the kind of things that you are all engaged with before I start saying anything. So, how many of you here are actually associated with vehicles and vehicle manufacturing? Oh, quite a few. That's encouraging. And what about connectivity and technology and that kind of stuff? A lot of those. Oh, that's really interesting. Lots of connectivity. But what about who's here from a city or a council or actually somebody running the roads? You're in short supply, guys. So I think that's quite interesting because what was really interesting in the conversation here is that Darren was bringing us some really interesting things, looking at it from the perspective of here are the provisions of infrastructure, and the rest of us are trying to work out what to do with that. And I've had a background for a long time in being involved in connecting stuff. I mean, sadly, and I suppose excitingly, my first connecting product is now in the Science Museum. So that kind of tells you an awful lot about my age, but it also maybe tells you something about the pace of technology. What's been happening, though, is that we've been able to connect stuff up for quite a long time. And my background is involved in building businesses that join stuff up, using every mobile network there is around and using all kinds of different comms technology and doing that globally and sticking it in things that are being made in different parts of the world so that they can be delivered to vehicles, but as well as that, buildings and street lights and equipment and roadside cabinets and all of the stuff of life. And what is a big challenge with a lot of people and a lot of this technology is that, as Paul said earlier on, we've got an elephant in the room. Obviously not obviously today, but an elephant in the room. What is this elephant? Well, some people say the big challenge we have now is enabling the elephants to cope with the bees. Now, I just picked that up because that was the comment that came out earlier on. Because what we've got is we've got a lot of big telecoms companies. We've got a lot of people trying to organize everything. We've got a lot of people big companies who produce vehicles, and we've got stonking great cities, and we've got big national problems. And in amongst it all, there are lots and lots of different sorts of things that might need to relate to each other, all of which appear to sometimes connect and sometimes not. Sometimes they're there and sometimes they're not. How do we get the elephants to cope with the bees? And Darren also said something which was really interesting. You said there's a problem about getting some open data sharing going on. And the government initiative has been to say, let's have open data. And then as soon as you do that, everybody goes, ooh, how are we going to handle that? That's scary. But actually, isn't that where the elephants need to cope with the bees? Shouldn't I be able to walk down the road and my clothing talk to other things around it? Shouldn't my asthma inhaler talk to the air quality meter that's actually responding to the problems over the stuff that the traffic is causing in the street? Wouldn't that be a great idea? And Darren also said the next challenge is going to be over data. And so I thought that would be a neat thing to address today. So that's my way of introduction to connect it into the stuff that's going on. And I'm coming along with some stuff that we are doing in my present business, because my previous one, we've got all sorts of things connected. We've got millions of things connected. And we got really good at connecting stuff, and that business is going really well. But building that business, I realized that we got a problem, because we couldn't enable things to interact with people that represented real life for real stuff. So we set about building my present business called IoTic Labs. Some of you will hate this, but there's one or two large organizations who are adopting this as the way forward to enable them to achieve some of the things that you've raised as questions today. So I thought I'd start off with a really concrete example, because I know you guys like a concrete example. So this was just a real thing, and it's just a good example of something. We were involved with a company, well, that does construction sites. Construction sites are a big problem for most of our cities because you get loads of vehicles coming into them and they screw the city up, don't they? And loads of little local councils with me have just said recently, we've really got a big problem because we can't cope with the construction traffic on our roads. And so one of these contractors who was building this stuff in the middle of London said, what are we going to do? And this was a really serious, this was a practical, real example. Concrete has a problem. If it arrives at the wrong time on the site and you pour it in a hole, if it's gone past its use-by date, you've got a serious problem because you often have to demolish stuff afterwards. And they got a construction site and they planned all the roads and the routes around it and it was all lovely. And they knew they had two local concrete suppliers. One was really close and one was a distance away. That ought to be easy. When you want your concrete, you can order it from the supplier and it should arrive. What could possibly go wrong? Any ideas? Anybody got any ideas about what could go wrong?
Roadworks.
Yeah, okay, anything else? Football match, anything else? Traffic, yeah, okay, anything else? Well, I tell you what really went wrong with schools. And you all know what happens now, don't you? Because the kids come out of school or the parents are there, and if it's raining, the whole place is clogged up with stuff. So which concrete supplier are you now going to go to? How can you just do something really, really simple like that? That's not brain the size of a planet stuff, is it? All of this data is in public domain. Could you not make that available to a truck and interact with it? Couldn't you make that community work better? Well, obviously you can. So how on earth do we set about doing that? Well, we started talking to these people who are managing this construction site, and they started telling us about the nature of their problem, and the vehicles, and the people who had to drive dumper trucks, and the people who had to deliver stuff to site, and the ones who had to organise the roads, and the buses, and the lanes, and the closures, and all the other things that went with it. And they came up with this diagram, which was obviously easy to fix, because that was just the simple kind of interrelationships between things. The crazy thing about this is that cities and stuff that's all around us, like even something basic like a school timetable, are pretty dumb things. There's no real connectivity problem with a lot of this stuff. I know that a lot of you are having fun with 5G and it's all very exciting and we love it and it does all kinds of whizzy stuff and we can do all kinds of nice joining up things, but how do you handle the things that come out of the end of that and make that work with other stuff? This is an interoperability challenge. That's fundamentally where it goes wrong. Because as you know, John Donne said, no man's an island. Okay, we get that, but nor is anything else. Nor is your car, nor is the street light, nor is the asthma inhaler, nor is the rain, nor is the basic stuff about the fact that the road surface has got a hole in it. None of those things is an isolated thing. What we are needing to do is to determine some basic stuff, like what data is available, what might be relevant to me now. Will it talk to me? Can we be friends? Can we trust it? Is it for now or is it forever? Quite often when you come into a place, I'm going to be meeting you all today, but actually I may never meet any of you again. Some of you we're going to have a relationship with, and we're going to have a useful exchange, and something we say together may change the rest of our lives. And I may never see you again after that moment. And that's what happens when you have pieces of equipment interacting with each other. When you've got tiny bits of data changing the way you see the whole world. The trouble is that what we try to do, because we're very good at managing and organizing stuff, is we try to be use case driven. But actually we know from the rest of the internet that once we start joining stuff up, the use cases change as a result of the interaction. Nobody could have said, let's design the internet and it will all make joining up stuff really nice and easy. And of course we'll have Facebook. And of course we'll have Google. And of course we'll have Wikipedia. Nobody planned all that. Suddenly the use cases completely change and we do things with things that we never imagined we were going to do. So, how do we tackle this kind of problem? Well, what we've tried to do is to do it in a slightly odd way. Because we said, let's make it so that we can get things that are real, being able to interact with each other by doing it in a not real way. So what we do is we say, okay, let's create a virtual version of something. And in the case of the construction site, what we did was we set about creating virtual versions of various different pieces of plant and equipment. They're twins of the real thing, but not the real thing. And when you've got twins of them, you can enable the data between each of them to interact, but you never actually interfere with the original source. That's the key. Because now you can find each other, you can search and you can interact, you can do all of the kind of things you do with eBay. But as you know, eBay doesn't ever stock the product. They just enable those things to get in touch with each other and find out enough from each other to interact. And then other interactions go on in real life outside that. But because you can do it with the sources and with the main activity that you're involved with, your own little quiet private community, you can allow things that are in the public domain to also come in and interact with it as well. And that means to say you suddenly get a rich environment of data exchange and handling without risks, but with an interoperability that can be transient as well as more permanent. It also enables you to handle all kinds of other facilities as well. So what we've done in this IoTic space is we've enabled you to broker interactions between data and controls. That's essentially what's going on. We're not holding the data, we're not storing it, but what we're doing is we're enabling it to interact in just the same way as we kind of use the internet every day. You don't have to have a database for every website you go into, and you don't have to remember every DNS address. But you can find things and you can take data from them and you can interact with them. And you can host this in a cloud, you can have your own private versions. What this does is it enables you to create a digital twin of a whole host of different sources and the consumers, and you can describe them semantically. You can describe them in real-world terms so that you can find stuff, or you can describe them in computer-friendly terms, because we know that more and more of these interactions are going to be things finding other things on their own. I don't really want to try to remember all the passwords and involvements with everything. I'd love my machines to get on and sort that out for me. That's what's going to be happening in the vehicle to infrastructure and the infrastructure to vehicle environments. Because as they become more complicated, all kinds of new things will happen. And you need to be able to securely and flexibly transform these processes so you get actually an event-driven business, rather than trying to create a series of reports to enable you to analyze something that's already happened and try to make it not happen again. Instead, you want to be able to interact with it as it's going on. And you can create transient and temporary connections that way. And a great example really is seriously that asthma inhaler. And actually, we talked about Essex earlier on. Well, Essex County Council is doing exactly this with dementia care patients, so they can actually go down the road and they'll know what bus they are going to take them home. Because actually it's interacting with various pieces of equipment on a transitory basis. We're doing the same thing in Cambridge, where we're actually interacting between the guided busways and the road signs and information systems in the city, and it's also looking for potholes. Because we didn't try to define it all beforehand, we let the data actually interact with other data sources and devices so that they actually found each other and created their own ecosystems. What this does is it enables the user and the use case to develop as you go along. So I thought I'd actually give you a little example of doing this, because when we set this up, we said, look, this is going to be like kind of the internet. It's got to be intuitive to use this stuff. And so we began by saying, let's get a whole lot of 14-year-olds to have a go with it, on the basis that if anybody's going to make this work, they probably will, because they're not bound by our existing mindset. So what we did is we got a local school to come along, and we gave them a doorbell. And we said, you're going to build a better doorbell. I mean, you all know doorbells, don't you? Button, bell, linear system, command and control. Nobody's going to interfere with my doorbell. That's all lovely. So what we did is we said we're going to cut the wire between the button and the bell. And we're going to make it so that the button just says, hello, I'm a button. And then another group was set off with the job of discovering a button and then doing something with it. And what was really fun was that it took these kids about 3/4 of an hour to get the button to appear in this kind of virtual space as a digital twin of the doorbell button. And then the second group, excitingly, when they noticed the button being pressed, they got the kettle to boil. And we said, why did you do that? And they said, if there's somebody at the door, they're going to want a cup of tea. And I kind of loved that because they weren't constrained by needing to make it go ding-dong. I mean, they did make it go ding-dong as well, but the point was they didn't have to do that. And then what they did was they put a feedback mechanism actually into the door, so they made a light come on to say somebody's going to be with you in a moment. Suddenly, the connection between things that we think are naturally joined up changed the way we saw and handled data. So here's a light bulb and a switch, very straightforward. What we did is we cut that link and we said, let's create a digital version of that switch. And then that actually has two very simple forms of data, on and off. It's got a control, which is on and off. And then what we did was we said, let's think of the light bulb separately. And once you do that, you then got a control interface to the light bulb that is absolutely separate now from the switch. But it can discover the switch and interact with the data it gets from it. Neither of them are vulnerable. Both of them can interact. And suddenly you've created an environment where you can have relationships that may be permanent or transient. That is quite a simple approach to take. But we've done it with much more complicated things as well. So currently we're working with massive great engine manufacturers. We're working with manufacturing lines, and we're currently exploring doing a whole construction site. Because on a construction site, you've got vehicles, equipment, if you like, the bees coming in to the elephant. And all of them need to interact because none of them work for the elephant. All of those guys that drive the dumper trucks, and the dumper trucks is on rental and hire anyway, how do they all operate with together? Well, that's a kind of microcosm of the city. You can start doing some serious activity this way. And you can evolve from this very simple level 1 real world situation to creating data and controls that can then interact and go beyond that into more complex environments that can also benefit by those outside connections that enable the analysis, the data management, the big data engines, all of those clever systems to also interoperate in a way that they wouldn't have done before. And what we see happening is an event-driven log of all of the activities associated with the machines and equipment that are around. The vehicles themselves, the manufacturers, the engines, the components, and the city, which is important. But not just the city, the countryside, the road manager, the people who are looking after the country estate, the ones who are looking after the national park, the ones who are caring about the air quality. And as we start bringing those things together, we start finding that we create a more and more sophisticated environment of the virtual things all existing in a common environment so that they can interact, they can communicate to storage engines, they can communicate over fixed networks, they can communicate over virtual networks, they can communicate easily over the internet, but of course you can handle all of the private and virtual infrastructure you might have with a 5G network, with a low-power LoRa network, or a low-power WAN network, or even going into white space. No problems at all, because you can also connect right through to the buildings themselves. And that means to say that you end up with this extensible, flexible environment that grows with your needs without having to define everything in advance. So what happens is that things discover each other, they build relationships, and new outcomes are derived. The key thing with this is that you don't need to have worked out everything to begin. You don't need to guess everything. You treat it more like the internet. Because you don't, there's loads and loads of data already available. We're not short of data. The key thing to do is to start. And as you adopt an open world approach, what you do is you enable something to evolve and grow, and the use cases change as the interactions increase. There's this high-speed sustainable manufacturing institute. This is one of these kind of, hey, let's do something exciting in our supply chains and management. But this is actually focused around the automotive industry at the moment. And the guys who are running that said, we love this because there's total flexibility in terms of what information is captured and what outcomes are produced. A twin can be very scalable, starting small with just a few KPIs and machines, but building into a total monitoring and control system. This is something that's enabling that world of complex data to start becoming accessible, not only to the vehicles, but also to the city, our community, and our individuals. It's an exciting opportunity, and we'd love to engage with you. So please come and have a conversation. I'd love to hear your views. I'd love to discuss it with you more. Thank you.